Well, hello and welcome. In this video, I'm going to sketch out two different compositions of a barn that's over 100 years old at a lavender farm outside of Salem, Oregon. So I like to begin with a pencil sketch. So the photo I'm referencing, you can kind of see it on my cell phone at the bottom of the screen. It is a horizontal format, but I wanted to do a vertical painting. So it kind of like focused in on the rows of lavender leading up to the barn. And then of course the barn. And you know what? I can make this a little bit wider than what I initially sketched out for the format of this painting. Because you know, it's art, you can change things, which is awesome. So getting in the foundation of the painting, that's all about the drawing part. So looking at your reference and then drawing it however accurate you want it to be or not want it to be. I mean, you don't have to draw everything in the photo, because that is the awesome part about art, is that you can add elements or take away elements within your reference photo. You put like multiple different things together from different photos to make one painting as well too. So I am sketching out this particular barn with lavender because this summer I did a painting class out there. There's like a concrete patio right in front of the barn, between the barn and the lavender, and that is where class was held. And yes, I am planning to do another class out here. This is Arrowhead Lavender Farm out in Salem, Oregon. 2023, this year, was actually their first year open after planting their lavender, I believe 2 winters ago. 2 or 3 winters ago. And so it's a first year open, and we had a painting class, and it was a lot of fun. It was actually a sold out class. I had so many new faces and returning faces. It was fun. But for this little study, I'm just playing around with my ink pen. So if you want to check out this pen, I'll have it linked in the description below on my Amazon storefront. I did buy waterproof ink. It does come with an ink cartridge already filled, but I never used it, so I have no idea if it is waterproof or not. And I like to do ink and then watercolor over it. So for me, it's really important that the ink is waterproof, because I didn't want the ink to just bleed everywhere and ooze and whatnot. So yeah, if you want to see a video on that, I'll link that here. And yeah, so we are working on the outline of this barn because, you know, why not? So just working on that. I really want to define the shape more. That way, when I go to do the class painting, I really know what the lines should be and where they should go. So just having some fun while I'm at it, because why not? There's a couple of windows and sliding doors on the barn. I really want to show the character of this really old barn, so I'm taking my time to get those features in. And when I'm not chatting, I'll give you some music to listen to. Feel free to have this playing while you're working on some other things. Maybe we can just, paint together. You work on a painting, you watch me draw and paint. That could be a lot of fun. So for the lavender here, I really don't want to draw in a bunch, but I wanted to give some suggestion of the lavender. And later you'll see I can even add more ink on top of a watercolor when it's done. So I'm grabbing some handy dandy washi tape that I know that works in this sketchbook, and because I wanted to do a nice border for this little composition that I created for the old barn with the rows of lavender. And sometimes just having that clean edge, chef's kiss. All right, I got my paper secure with the washi tape, and I use a little bulldog clip because I want to help keep the paper as flat as possible so that as I paint, it dries flat. There's nothing more frustrating than super wavy paper in your sketchbook or even just on normal paper. So since I am using this as a little composition study for a watercolor painting class, I'm using one of the palettes that I would be using for class. So for my classes, I use all M. Graham paint, and I use 5 basic colors. There's the alizarin crimson, Hansa yellow deep, ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, and burnt sienna. So those are the 5 colors that I usually use because I want to show people that you don't need to buy 10 tubes of paint in order to paint with watercolors. You really only need the primary colors, which are red, yellow, and blue, especially since adding water to the paint lightens it up. You do not have to buy a white paint in order to paint with watercolors. So I'm just going to start with the sky. I'm using mostly cerulean blue and a little bit of ultramarine blue there to deepen some of the parts. Just playing around and mixing colors. Is it really tempting to use my really big palette? Absolutely, but the colors will not be the same as for my students. So I got some of this red, and I'm actually adding a little bit of my quinacridone rust. So about half of my paint palettes for classes have quinacridone rust because I also do a red fox and the snow painting, and quinacridone rust is awesome for that. So for the barn, I did some quinacridone rust, some alizarin crimson, and some burnt sienna to get that rusty red color for the barn. And I can paint the barn while the background of the sky is still wet because I have this tiny little sliver of dry paper between the barn color and the sky because that's like the tin roof. So I'm just adding that in, painting over the black areas that I made with my fountain pen, not worrying about that. So now I got some lavender color, purple, so my alizarin crimson and then ultramarine blue for this purple. I'm just brushing it in, being careful not to really touch the barn too much. And if I do, you know what? It's watercolor. It can be a cool effect. I can always clean it up with a damp paintbrush or a paper towel. So I'm getting the trees in, and then the foliage for the grass and the stems around the lavender. It was a lot of fun going out to a couple of different lavender farms this summer to teach some watercolor painting classes. You know, it's just like so calming and relaxing to be outside, the birds chirping and the sun shining and the honeybees being real busy, pollinating and doing their jobs. just adding some darker green into the painting to do a little variation of colors, to play around, not getting too caught up in the colors blending on the paper, but I can use a clean, damp brush to kind of clean up some areas as needed. So I'm going to start composition number 2, and this one is going to be a horizontal composition. So I will have the barn kind of at a 3/4 view, so you can see the far left side of the barn as well, just to have a little variation in the compositions to choose from for the final painting, for the painting class. So once again, using my pencil to sketch it out. And once again, I will fast forward this a little bit so the drawing can get done faster. Now it's time to pull out my fountain pen again and to sketch in some details. You'll see that I'm rotating the fountain pen around a little bit. That way I can get the width of line that I want. Depending on how I hold the pen, it kind of denotes like how thick or thin the line making will be for this pen. And you're going to notice that the rows of lavender are a lot different from my first composition because I'm not looking at the barn head on, straight on. It's at a little bit at an angle, and so you see the left side of the barn and the rows are going off to the right more to give more depth and definition for this little painting. now it's time to paint again. So the really cool thing about watercolors, even though I didn't really leave these watercolors sitting for very long, even if I let it sit for like a day or two, just leave the paint in the palette and leave it alone, just add a little water to it and it'll work again right away. You don't have to worry about having to remix the colors if they're already in your palette. So that's a really cool thing about watercolors. You just add water and it reactivates the paint and you can get to painting again. So the method I'm using for the barn this time is a wet on dry, where the paper's dry and my paintbrush is wet with paint. And so the paint just goes where my paintbrush puts it. Because the paper's dry, it's not going to spread and do its own thing. So the barn is still mostly damp with paint, and so I'm just going with my paintbrush and do a couple more brush strokes here and there, kind of change up the color of my paint a little bit to add some variation and some differences. And this paper is not soaking wet, so you can see the definition of the brush strokes more. Gosh, who doesn't love a red barn? You know, it's just classic countryside. Once again, going in with some cerulean blue for the sky. And the paper's dry, so I'm just putting it on the paper with my paintbrush. And if you are curious about what paintbrush I'm using for this painting, I will link it down below with one of my affiliate links. You know, that's one of the ways you can support artists without spending money on their courses or products or anything. If you're already shopping, check out their affiliate links. Even if you don't purchase what they're linking to, if you still usually use the link, you can click on it and then just get something else, and it still helps support the artist. And that way you can just spend money on what you'd normally spend on. So you'll see I'm leaving some gaps on the far right of the painting. Those are for trees. So watercolor is transparent, so I could paint it all blue over there, but then you would see blue coming through the trees, which honestly would not be the end of the world because you use blue anyways to make green. So they'd just be a little bit more blue probably. So yeah. So when I'm painting this lavender, I'm just kind of painting the basic shape. I'm not going in and doing all the little tiny flowers for the lavender, just painting big, broad brush strokes, especially for this size of painting, and just letting the watercolor kind of do its own thing, because that's the magic of watercolors. It kind of reacts and changes and flows and do its own thing. So the watercolor kind of does half of the work pretty much sometimes. It's all in the understanding of how much water to use or not use. And if you want to check out a video about how I like to use watercolor and about the personality of watercolors, check out my video right here where I chat all about the personality of watercolor painting. Like, check out those blooms that are going on in the lavender, like below the barn. You can see where the water is like really pushing that purple around and just doing its own thing. So since I didn't get the paper soaking wet, the sky is pretty dry, so I'm just gonna jump in and do the trees. And even if this painting, the paint just like kind of blends out a little bit, it's not the end of the world because this is a little study for the composition for doing a painting class at this location. I mentioned that I would link in the description the fountain pen I'm using, this paintbrush. I will also link the sketchbook I am using. It is not 100% cotton, it's cellulose, but you know, it actually does pretty good. I'm quite happy with it, and I would get this sketchbook again. I haven't yet because I'm playing around with other sketchbooks too, because each sketchbook kind of has its own pros and cons, and just playing around with them, I can figure out which ones I do or don't like. Okay, the paint is dry. It's time to peel off that washi tape and reveal those clean edges. And if you have enjoyed watching this video, I would love for you to like it. And if you want to see more videos like this, where I paint with watercolors and play around with different mediums, please subscribe to my channel. I would love for you to follow along, and I don't want you to miss anything if you enjoy my content. And the last step here is to do some more ink work with my fountain pen. I really wanted to do a black border, just kind of make it stand out a little bit more. And I vary the thickness of the line of my ink from my fountain pen just to give it a little bit more character. Well, thank you again so much for watching. I hope this video has inspired you. And if you are in the Salem area in July, yeah, I think it's around July when lavender bloom, come and check out Arrowhead Lavender Farm. They're new, and I will be teaching more classes there, so check out my website watercolorsmadeeasy.com for all of my in-person classes and what I have coming up. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next video.